Hi everyone, welcome to the peer reviewer training for this year's volume of the Cambridge Educational Research e-Journal. Quite a mouthful always. My name is Bella Kavicki and I'm the events manager on this year's editorial board. And part of my job is planning events like these in support of our authors and support of our peer reviewers like you throughout the academic year. So for this, as you have already received by email, I noticed that we have made this year's training an asynchronous model, just for ease, for scheduling, and also hopefully easier for you so you can watch this on your own time. Feel free to double speed me if you want, but also then you have it as well, just to go back to if you're reviewing your own papers and have questions. This video will be here for you. So that in mind, I do want to keep this short and sweet. I recognize it's a busy time of year. So I'm going to go over what we'll discuss. If I can get my slide. All right. So what we'll cover in this short video is an introduction to who I am, to what we're doing here as we're going through right now. We'll look at the question, what is a peer reviewer? Then we'll go over the specifics of our own journal and the process and timeline of that. Then I've compiled a few common questions from past years' trainings, and I thought it might be nice to review those in case you have them yourself or maybe spark an idea in your brain. And then I'll just share a little bit about next steps moving forward. So this is your first time peer reviewing. I hope all of this, by the end of this, you feel more confident in what you're undertaking and hopefully have answered a few questions that I think are common to have at the start of the process. And if you're a more experienced peer reviewer, then I just hope this training provides a refresher, perhaps goes over the specifics of this journal and so on. So all which is to say, thanks for being here, thanks for listening, and we're very excited. So to kick us off, what is the job of a peer reviewer? So peer reviewers, I want to speak for myself, I think they're so crucial to that research process because what peer reviewers do are help determine the validity of our studies. So you might have heard often about like in the research community about giving back to it. And I think peer reviewing is perhaps the most obvious and probably the most common way of doing that because what you do in your role as peer reviewer is taking a critical assessment of someone else's work and determining what does it contribute to the field, what is the strength of the paper, what are possible weaknesses or things that need to be improved. And as a whole, if each study that we do goes through that review process, you can just expect then the quality of research grows because we're taking these very close and detailed assessments of each piece of work. And so it is a way of giving back because not only as a researcher, of course, you're publishing your own work, undertaking different projects, could be around the world, could be in your own institution and so on, which is so exciting. But at the same time, I think you need to review wearing the hat of a reviewer shows you the work across your industry, across your field. It also shows you you're offering your own expertise and your own perspective to strengthen and support another researcher in their work. So it's kind of this symbiotic relationship in that by publishing research, that's really exciting, making some developments there. By reviewing research, I think you're also making further developments in the field because you're helping someone else. And so I think that's a very cool relationship. And I hope you find this process a rewarding one for that reason. So I think another question, and certainly in my own kind of experience, I've always asked like, what makes a good peer reviewer? And certainly it can vary from journal to journal in terms of responsibilities. I think broad strokes, we all know what a peer reviewer does, they're reviewing the work, but perhaps the extent to which the reviews are expected or how critical a reviewer should be and so on can depend on the journal. But some words that come to mind, and hopefully these were ones that you're kind of on the same page with me about, reasonable, critical, constructive, and supportive. And certainly here at CERJ, we hope that you'll be a supportive resource for our authors in the journal, but also a critical one. And I think those can seem contradicting, but here we hope that they actually go hand in hand, that by providing a critical assessment, looking for the strengths and also looking for the weak points, the author feels supported because they know exactly what they want to do to make this paper ready for publication. So All that in mind, peer reviewing, very amazing process, and certainly an important one, not just in this context, but I think in academia at large. So some questions you might ask in the peer reviewing process. So when you're a peer reviewer, you'll receive the study. We'll go over, again, the nitty-gritty details in just a moment. But you receive the study, you're reading it through. Some questions you might ask yourself to determine what is the study trying to do, and is the study ready for publication in a journal? So you could ask, what has the author achieved? What is the study doing? What did the author intend to do, and what did they end up finding in the end? And by publishing it, what will the achievement be? Kind of going with that is like, what contributions does this study make? What does this offer the field that they're in? What might it offer other fields if there's interdisciplinary considerations? Is it strengthening an existing point? Is it furthering our understanding? Is it developing a completely new theory or a completely new perspective? I think sometimes we can prioritize the contributions of a study as something that needs to be big and grand. But I do think that affirming something that we already know, perhaps in a new light, is just as powerful. And that's, again, a job of a peer reviewer, is to consider the nuances of these contributions. Perhaps on the less like content side of things, but the proofreading and formatting issues, are there any, is important, because I think the legibility of a study can absolutely impact how it's received by a reader. So as a peer reviewer, perhaps you're noticing a lot of proofreading issues. That's something you might flag. So that way, when it comes time to publish, the author has that in mind and can go back and edit as necessary for greater readability. Again, you might also ask, what are the strengths and limitations in the methodology? A great question. Certainly looking at the content, what they discover, but we also have to consider, how did they get to those findings? What methods were they using? Does it make sense with the questions they're asking or what they're hoping to explore? Are they consistent? It would make no sense to be thinking posing a quantitative question and then using qualitative methods, unless that's justified. Perhaps it is really consistent. That's something you want to highlight. So methodology is absolutely under the scope of a peer reviewer's assessment, considering, again, strengths, limitations, areas for growth, and so on. Another question might be, are there ethical considerations? Does the author consider the ethics of their work? If so, how do they write about them? How does it appear in the study itself? Perhaps they don't make mention of it, and that's something you want to raise. And certainly in the education world, I think ethics comes up in all of our research, because we're working with in institutions of like schools, we're working in learning environments. We might be working with young people. We might be working with other vulnerable populations. Education is so broad. I think ethical considerations itself is broad. And so as a peer reviewer, you might have to, or you might be curious and want to raise these questions about, has the author considered this fully enough? And another question might be, what does the author need to revisit? And I think that's when we talk about a critical assessment, as making these recommendations, saying, this is when something that I think is missing from the paper. This is something that I think the paper needs to be stronger, and so on. And so that is all put forward, those recommendations, these questions you're raising, they're all put forward with the intention of supporting the author, at least in our journal context. We want you to help support the author and to have the paper feel ready for publication. And so that's why it's a lot. We just went through quite a few questions, but it's a lot, that it's all for the good reason of supporting other fellow early career researchers. So, process of peer reviewing. Again, we have all these questions circulating, the job of a peer reviewer, but what do you do when you sit down with that paper? So a common study, as we all likely know, is broken down into different components: the title, the abstract, the research question. And I think as a peer reviewer, it can be really helpful to break down the manuscript and assess it in those parts as well. So if we start with the title, right, is the title appropriate to the content? Does the title make sense? Give you the preview that you're expecting of what the paper is about? Does it capture it well? And so on. Then you can move to the abstract. Does the abstract concisely capture the study? Does it make sense for someone without the specialized jargon? Do the keywords appropriately capture what the study is about. And so you might notice a theme already that what we're really looking for is consistency throughout with these components, certainly. Consistency to the content, to the questions, and also a readability. I think that's, I don't want to overstate or understate that importance of having work that speaks to a general audience, or having work that a general audience is accessible for a general reader. So title, abstract, then you might move to the research question. Is it clearly stated what they're intending to look for, or intended at the start at least? Is it clearly stated? Is it specific enough? Do you understand what they're trying to explore or find out in their paper? And then to that, as we were just saying on the last slide, does the methodology make sense with that research question and intention? Is it explained fully? Do you understand how they found out what they did in their study? Is it justified? Do they have a reason behind the choice that they did? Because certainly there's so many methods out there. Why did they choose this specific one? And as I was just saying, the theme of the day, is it consistent? Is it consistent with their ontological approach, like how they think knowledge operates in the world? And does the method contribute to that, or the method back that thinking up? And then again, if we move right through a study, so I really hope, as you can see here, what we're doing is just kind of breaking down the paper into parts. So if you move from the question, but like the introduction phase, the methodology, and we might then understand or see an author write about their findings. And there in the findings section, the discussion section, ask yourself, are they engaged in a compelling way, words? Are they written about in a way that is interesting to you as a reader, but also does it move beyond just general description? Does it have that analytical edge that we're looking for in a research study? And not just what they did, but why does that matter to us? Why is that important? What does that tell us about the world in some way? So that's what the analytical presentation is about, not just describing, oh, I did this for my research and day by day, here's what happened, but rather, are they pushing our knowledge forward in some way? And then finally, as we come to the concluding portion of the paper, you can ask yourself, does the author note the implications of the study? What is the study doing? Does it call for further research? What does it suggest about perhaps an educational practice in our context as educational researchers? What does this knowledge do, and what do we need more of? And that's kind of where the concluding note might end on. And I want to, of course, say that here that these questions do not cover everything that you're going to come across in your own peer review assignment, but hopefully they give you a nice starting point of, again, breaking down the manuscript by its part, and then asking yourself these questions of how is it consistent throughout, and how is it justified throughout, and basing your recommendations from there. Oh, goodness, I hate also not doing this live because I wish I could ask if anyone had questions, but we'll get to that at the end. All right, now talking a little bit specifically about our own educational research e-journal here. Our process is very similar, modeled on many, many other peer review processes. So hopefully if you've done this before, it doesn't come as too much of a surprise or difference. And again, if you're new to this, I hope it's pretty straightforward. At least I certainly think it is. So as you can see here on the right, as a peer reviewer, what we're going to be sending you is a peer review report. And the peer review report is basically going to just walk you right through what we're hoping to understand about your assessment of the manuscript. So there'll be questions kind of just like the ones I just went over about, is the title appropriate? Is the purpose clearly stated? Do we understand what the methodology is? Is it justified? Is it explained well? And so you take us through that questionnaire step by step. And right there, it's simple, a yes, no, not available, depending on, again, the study, or maybe it's just a different, like an arts-based one might not have everything, or qualitative versus quantitative, and so on. But we do that as reference for us on the editorial board, as we will be making the final decision whether or not a manuscript will be included in the journal. So with that, that is enormously helpful for us because it gives us like a pretty clear snapshot of your take on the paper, your assessment of the paper. And so that is section, I'm going to double check my own information here. That is section A, B, and C on the peer review report, which will be emailed out to you. And then we also have a comment section. So the comment section is no longer, this is like tick a box, but rather this is your point or your place to write some comments on the paper, add your recommendations and suggestions, and explain in more detail why you come to the conclusion you did about whether or not a paper is ready for publication in this year's volume. So you have kind of the snapshot at the top, quick, you can do it as you're reading. And then the comments at the end are meant to be a more in-depth explanation of your assessment. And then some of those comments will be shared with the author. So that way they can make their own edits if it's moving forward. They have a kind of a base of your suggestions and can edit their paper appropriately. And of course, those comments and suggestions are also shared with us on the editorial board, because again, we are making the decision on whether the paper moves forward or not. So I feels almost weird explaining it because we do try to make it as straightforward as possible. And when you receive it, I hope again, you find it the same. So that will be in your inbox. If it's not already there already, then it will be there shortly. And then so just to go over here are kind of the step-by-step process of review for submission to CERJ. I think it's helpful sometimes as context as a peer reviewer of like, where am I in kind of the larger process of this manuscript submission and edit. So step number 1 is a desk review by the editorial board, and that's already been completed. So us on the board have read all the submissions. It was read once by one editor, then read again by another editor, and then we decided based on the general submission criteria, how much it met the kind of the mission of our journal, whether to accept it or reject it. And so those accepted are now moving on to the peer review, which is where you all come in. And so each manuscript will be going through a peer review by 2 anonymous reviewers. And hopefully, again, when I first heard that, I was like, oh, thank goodness. I think it's nice to have not as much pressure on you. You're not the only one reviewing the paper. And sometimes that can actually be really interesting to see with any piece of writing, I think, to get different audiences or different perspectives on the study. And that's, I think, if I could just wax poetic here, speaks to the larger value of peer review is that you're getting these different perspectives on a body of work. So on a smaller scale, that's what we're doing here. You have your 2 anonymous reviewers doing this peer review process. You will fill out that peer review form, and we try to sort the reviewers based on the subjects of your interest and expertise. So that way you are reading something related to your field. So if you're an arts-based research, we'll try to pair you with an arts-based study. If you know or you focus on international development, then we'll give you a corresponding study there as well. So that's the peer review process. Once we on the editorial board receive your reports, we compile it all, we study, use it to form our assessment on whether then the study can move forward for publication. If it does move forward for publication from that process, step number 3, we move to step number 4, and authors have the opportunity to receive their feedback, edit based on the peer review process and the editorial feedback from us. So I think it's great. I think it speaks so much to what writing is all about, right? Is that you kind of send it out, get see how it's received, it's editing, and then you have the opportunity to edit again, put it out there again. It's kind of this back and forth with your reader. So again, me just talking about why the peer review process is so wonderful, and the SETA allows that kind of that dialogue to emerge with your work. So authors receive feedback, they edit, they send it back to us, and then throughout the summer, we'll be preparing the journal for publication in the fall. Step number 6 would be the celebration at the end, the little party to celebrate volume 9, of course, which you would all be welcome and encouraged to attend. So if it helps to kind of put dates on that, desk review has already happened. Peer review will be happening throughout the month of June. Editors receiving feedback, authors receiving feedback, I believe takes us to the end of June, and then the journal will be prepared in July and August. Those dates are not set in stone, totally taken from my memory, but do look in your email for the exact dates and deadlines. All right, so as promised, I wanted to finish out today's training with a few common questions that have been asked in years past. Perhaps you might know all the answers already, but it might be nice just to go through some of them. And of course, if you don't see your question here, I'll have on the next slide. We'll be hosting office hours. You can email us anytime. We love a good question, so don't hesitate to reach out. But the first question is, how detailed should you be in your feedback? And I think that's super important because you could be writing an essay on another essay, or you could be very brief and maybe conciseness is your specialty. But to that kind of that spectrum that we set up being too long, too short, I say I would err on the side of giving too much detail, in the sense that the more detailed your feedback is, the more the author has to work with, and then the stronger their study can be. And I recognize that's a lot of work to put on a peer reviewer, but we welcome the detail in your feedback because it can only have strengthened the paper in the end. And to help with that, we do offer word count suggestions, limits in our peer review report to give you a sense of how the length of the feedback that we're looking for, which is not to say you have to write up to that word limit. Please do not find things to write about if you feel you captured it well already, but also don't fear about writing too much within that word count. So that's on detail. How should you deal with subject matter outside of your expertise? A great question. And it goes back to what I was just saying a few slides ago, which is that we hope that by pairing your paper, your peer review assignment based on the subject matter that you expressed your expertise in when you signed up, that rather than giving you completely two separate disciplines, that you're reading something you're already somewhat familiar with, and maybe it's not your specific area of interest or your specific area that you're trained in, but it's under the broad umbrella of your kind of field of educational research that you should be able to comment on it with some expert knowledge, I think. But I also understand sometimes I'm an arts-based researcher myself, and I certainly don't know everything about arts-based research. But I think that's actually powerful as a peer reviewer, that maybe it's not something you know everything about. The subject matter lies just outside of your expertise, but that speaks to the general readership that I have also mentioned a little earlier as well, that you should be able to understand the writing should be accessible to you, and the findings should be accessible to you. It should not be so convoluted that you don't know or cannot follow the author's research and study. So that might be a recommendation if you find yourself in that position. That to me is something to include in your feedback, that the author needs to revisit possibly how can this be more accessible to a larger audience? Another great question. What should reviewers keep in mind when making their final recommendation? A great question. And I think here important to note that the pressure is not on you necessarily to make the decision. That falls to us as the editorial board, but your recommendation is saying, yes, I think this can be accepted. Yes, it can be accepted with recommendations or suggestions or edits required. I do not recommend this manuscript to be published. So there is a range in terms of your recommendations that you can make. This is on the peer review report. You can pull it up now if you'd like. I think you have about 5 options that you can select at the end. And so when you are making your final recommendation, it's kind of this balance. It's wanting to be supportive. You are, as an early career researcher yourself, likely, all of us as early career researchers, or maybe you're more experienced, and that's lovely and amazing, but the authors here are submitting some of their early research work. So I think in your recommendation, holding that truth, holding to the high standard that we like to hold ourselves to, that yes, this is a journal for folks who do not have years and years of research experience, but we do want to have a high quality journal of scholarly contributions. And that's what I think the past 8 volumes have shown, and we'd love to continue in that trend with volume 9. So holding those 2 truths, when you're making your final recommendation, I think ask yourself, as a reader, as a fellow researcher, do you see that with the edits that you've suggested, that this could make a contribution to the field, that this has a place in an academic journal? And I think that's what it just comes down to. Is this ready to be shared with an audience, a larger audience, or does it need more time? And I don't think it's a bad thing if it needs more time, or maybe it's not quite ready yet. And that just says contribute next year. So don't be scared to say, I don't recommend this manuscript to be rejected, but I think maybe go into your assessment with the intention of support. Can we support this author and getting to the publication stage? And I think, knock on wood, I have a belief in all of our submissions. So I hope you enjoy reading them and find that a lot of them are ready for publication with some edits or suggestions that you make. And when should you recommend a manuscript to be rejected? Kind of goes hand in hand with what I was just saying. But there are times when a manuscript, maybe the analysis isn't strong enough, the analysis isn't there. Maybe the writing would take too long. Yes, sometimes maybe that's it. The edits that the paper requires to be ready for publication fall beyond the scope of this year's journal, as in the edits would take too long, not be completed in the 3 weeks. I think we provide authors to make their revisions and edits in the paper. So that's something to keep in mind if you feel like, yes, with a strong revision stage, this paper could be ready, but maybe that falls to next year's journal. That could be a reason. Trying to think of anything else. Yeah, readership, the analysis, the methodology isn't explained to a point that you feel sufficiently thought out or justified. I think that's it. I'm going to think on that one more and I'll give some more. This is so funny because I'm not even live, but I'll think about all of these questions too. I'm happy to provide kind of a written response to each of them if that's also easier to access for folks. Great. I think that brings us to our end. Hopefully this was pretty speedy, but if you have any more questions, if I didn't cover something in this video, please do drop us an email at any time. Our address is there at cerj@educ.cam.ac.uk. Anytime, either me or another member of the editorial board would be happy to respond. I'm also going to trial something this year. I'm going to host office hours for peer reviewers. Perhaps you have a very specific question about your assignment. Perhaps you just want to talk about peer reviewing in general. Would be happy to do either. If you haven't received it already, I'm not sure if this is going to come out in this email or a separate email, but I'll give you the time and Zoom link of those office hours shortly. And then, of course, just as we kind of wrap up, a huge thank you for contributing your time and help to this year's volume. I said at the start, but I think peer reviewing is something that we do to give back to our fellow scholars and researchers. And so I just am grateful for that and grateful for all of your help in making this year's volume the best one. So with that, I'm going to stop this recording. And again, if you have any questions, please do reach out at any point. Thank you.